Hello, 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 everybody. How's it going? So, I had some time between my hair clients, so I wanted to hop on really quick and just talk to you guys about some frequently asked questions that I get in regards to micro locks. Please forgive me if I'm not looking at the camera. I am driving, but the information is going to be the same whether I'm looking at the camera or not. So, one of the questions that I get often is, what are micro locks and what's the difference between micro locks and sister locks? Now, sister locks is a trademarked name, and that particular organization has their own tool, their own patented grid, and their own training course for installing micro locks. But the method that they use is the interlocking method. So you can get interlocks, but they not be sister locks, if that makes sense. So the difference between sister locks and micro locks is micro locks are just small locks, but micro locks can be done in 3 different ways. You can have your micro locks done via the interlocking method, which is the same method used by the sister locks organization, or you could have your micro locks installed via mini twists. You could also have your micro locks installed via braids, considered braid locks, like micro braid locks. So that's the main difference between micro locks and sister locks. Sister locks are only done via the interlocking method, and they have their own training course, their own tool, and their own trademarked name. So if you have not taken the sister lock certification course, or your loctician was not sister lock certified and you got your hair installed by someone, there's no guarantee that you have sister locks unless they took that course and followed their recommendations for establishment. Now, micro locks, you can have just the same amount of locks, more locks or less locks than someone with sister locks, and still have micro locks. I hope that makes sense. Another question that I get commonly is, will the hair always look the way it did at the install? So typically, whatever size you start with the install, because you are no longer going to be detangling loose hair, you are going to still be shedding hair. We naturally shed 100 hairs a day. And so typically during like your wash day routine, you would comb those hairs out and discard them. Once you get locks installed, you are no longer going to be discarding those hairs. And it's that shed hair over time that will help your locks thicken. Another thing to keep in mind is that same shed hair, when the hair has completed its full growth cycle and it releases from your scalp, there's a little white bulb on the end that's called the follicle, the hair follicle. Now, everybody's body is different. Some people's is clear and you can't really see it. Other people's, it's solid white and it looks like lint over time once their hair has grown out a bit. So that's something to keep in mind, and it does not always respond to dye. So there are some people that don't like their locks after a few months because they notice all these white specks and they think that their hair is dirty, or they think that their hair has lint. It is not lint. Your hair is not dirty. It is the realization that your hair is still going through the normal shed life cycle, and those shed hairs still have to be released because we shed 100 hairs a day. Am I overcooked or undercooked? Interesting. I don't know. I'm undercooked because I may look shiny. That's just my, what's it called? Primer. That's just my primer. It's winter where I live. I live in Minnesota, so it is winter time. I am a traveling natural hair stylist in Minnesota. I am on my way to a hair client, and it is not that great outside on these roads, but I wanted to use the additional time that I'm going to be in traffic to give you guys some information in regards to locks. Please feel free to drop your questions in there. Please start with a question mark and end with a question mark so I know to try to read your question, information because I'm not going to be glancing at this screen a lot because I am driving. As I was saying, in regards to when your hair naturally sheds and those follicles release, it's those shed hairs that help the hair to naturally thicken. Now, depending on your hair texture will determine whether your locks are naturally frizzy or naturally tame. We can always do locksmithing to make it have a cleaner look, but your texture will determine the thickness of your locks. The softer texture you have, the easier it is for air and dust and dirt to get trapped within your locks and cause the locks to expand. The tighter your hair texture is, the easier it is to keep the lock nice and tight. However, locks in general are lint magnets. If you are someone that believes that your hair should be tight and tame and perfect the entire time that you're wearing any given style, then locks might not be for you. They are extremely versatile, and the smaller you go, bear in mind, a lot of people want to go really small with their locks, but there are some locticians that refuse to go down to a certain size, and the reason being is the smaller your locks are, the more often you need to have your hair maintenance. And so a lot of people financially, it doesn't make sense for them to be going back to their loctician every 3 to 4 weeks to have their hair maintenance because their hair is growing so quickly. So there's a couple things to consider before getting locks. Your rate of hair growth should be something that you think about, how quickly your hair grows, the size locks that you want when they are in their mature state, not when they are first done. Because again, like I mentioned at the beginning of the video, how you start is not how you finish. Your locks will always end up larger than whatever size you start them. So that's definitely something to keep in mind. A lot of people get concerned about losing locks. Losing locks is a part of the process. It doesn't have to be the end of the world. And the reason why it's part of the process is because, like I mentioned, we shed 100 hairs per day. Because those hairs shed randomly and we don't know what's going to shed when, you may have one given session of shedding where you have 2 hairs come out of any given lock. Another session of shedding, there may be one lock that has 15 hairs get released versus another lock that has no hairs get released. So when you think about the reality that we can't control when our hair sheds, that's something that you should keep in mind. Hair will grow back. The reason why our hair sheds randomly is because if our hair shed at all the same time, we would go bald every 7 years. And thank goodness that that is not the case. Another frequently asked question that I have with about locks is whether or not you are allowed to oil your hair. You are allowed to oil your hair with locks. You just may need to be mindful of the type of oils that you're using, the frequency that you oil your hair, and you may want to consider doing more of you might want to water down your oils a little bit. So for example, I prefer castor oil in my hair, but if I was to get locked, I would add castor oil to some rose water, pick that up and let it be liquidy and spray and apply that to my hair. Another reason why rose water is a really good option is because rose water is a natural humectant, and what that means is it pulls moisture in from the air into the hair, and that's definitely something that you should want to have, especially where I live. I live in Minnesota. It's very cold right now, and so with it being dry air outside, I don't want my hair to dry out because of the weather outside. So there's lots of different ways that you can install locks. Yes, you can still oil your locks after they are installed, but one of the most important things, because getting micro locks is an investment, it's typically very expensive. You want to make sure you're taking care of your hair properly, so braiding and banding is a must. If you don't know what braiding and banding is, all that means is before you wash your hair, you're going to section your hair and plait it off into a few braids. I typically recommend doing like 4 to 6 braids, but once you get to the end of the braid, once you have that hair dangling, you're going to flip that hair up, and then you're going to put a rubber band around it so it's like looped a little bit, and then that should help prevent unraveling while you're washing. That's going to be really important, because the more you wet your hair, the more you spritz it between your maintenances with your loctician, the more that you allow moisture to get access to your hair. Depending on your texture, the more likely it is to potentially unravel, create holes, and things of that nature. So that's definitely something that you should think about if you are considering getting your hair interlocked. If you already have locks, and you're experiencing any issues, one of the main complaints that I have with some of my clients is budding. And what that means is at the bottom of the lock starts to close. That's a natural part of the process, but it can be really confusing because it looks like hair and people have a tendency to want to pull it off. You do not want to pull that hair that's budding. That is a natural part of the process. Some people have very curly textures and they want to know if it's possible to keep their curly texture. The answer is yes, you can keep your curly texture, but not forever. Eventually the budding and the locking process will catch you, but I have seen someone keep their curly texture for up to a year by manually manipulating the ends of their hair. Now, when you do that, you still have to treat your hair like a baby lock because the end is loose and could potentially cause unraveling. I hope that makes sense. Another frequently asked question that I have is, can you use thick products like petroleums and greases and things of that nature? My recommendation would be no. I do have a client that still uses her petroleum products like Dr. Miracle and Sulfur 8, and she melts it down to use it. My recommendation is no, because it's so thick, that's going to add weight to the lock. And because the hair is locked, whether you interlocked it, whether it's twisted in mini twists, or whether it's braided, there's so many different crevices now for gook and dirt and sediment and things to get caught in your lock, and over time that's going to weigh the hair down. So when you get locks, you have to be thinking 2 to 3 to 4 years ahead. If you do not want your locks to be thinning over time because there's so much product buildup and you weren't able to wash it all out because of the thickness of the product, you don't want to cause your hair to be heavier than it's supposed to be for when your hair grows out and your scalp has to hold on to that hair. Another frequently asked question that I get is, can I get lock extensions? I do not want to go through the ugly phase. I don't want to wait for them to grow. I want to be able to style them right away. The short answer is yes. However, if your lock extensions are not installed via crocheting, which is the more expensive method, a lot of people do micro braid locks, or they'll do mini twists where they'll start it off with a braid and then twist it. You have to be extra careful and baby your hair when it's done that way. And the reason being is because you don't want the extension to come loose, you do not want the extension to come out, and you don't want to have wasted that investment. The softer your texture, the more easily it's going to come out. Possibly you have the risk of it coming out because when you wash and wet your hair, those loose curls loosen up and they expand, and it makes it a lot easier for things to get between the extension hair and your hair, if that makes sense. But yes, you can get lock extensions. There are a lot of different ways you can install lock extensions. I would recommend whatever extension hair you decide to purchase that you do a wash on it first, either with white vinegar and shampoo or apple cider vinegar and conditioner, whichever is your preference. But let that sit and soak in a bath of water along with a little bit of that for about 20 or 30 minutes, and then rinse thoroughly and then let it dry. You'll want to do this a few days before the appointment so that any chemicals or any leftover sediment or anything that your scalp could potentially react to will come off of the hair during that time. I've also had people ask me about if they have scalp issues, can you still get locks? The answer is yes. With scalp issues, you can still get locks. It really just depends on what the issue is, whether it's something that is treatable through consistent care and maintenance, or if you need to see a dermatologist or a trichologist to get a deeper understanding of what's going on with your scalp. I hope that answers some of your questions. I'm trying to think of what other frequently asked questions I get in regards to locks. There's a new trend going on right now where people are adding loose hair to the end of your locks. Is that something that's possible to do with micro locks? The answer is yes. I have done that service before. However, I do not recommend it, especially because over time, even with properly caring for it, it can get matted up and start to look kind of ratty, and then it needs to be removed, and that's a lot of money to invest for the time that it takes to do something like that. Any questions? I'm trying to see if I missed any questions. Okay. All right. Well, I hope that answers your questions, you guys. I wasn't on here for very long, but if you have any other questions, please drop them in the comments and I will come back on addressing those. I hope you guys are having a phenomenal rest of your day and stay blessed. Bye.